Have you ever wondered why your depth unsettles people? Why the more you think, the less you seem to belong? Why your silence, your questions, your refusal to play along with shallow expectations causes others, especially women, to withdraw, criticize, or misread you? Søren Kierkegaard once wrote, "People demand freedom of speech as a compensation for the freedom of thought, which they seldom use." But you think. And that is precisely the problem. You are not dangerous because you are aggressive. You are dangerous because you refuse to be predictable. And in a world where predictability is confused with safety, the intelligent man becomes a threat simply by existing. Most people aren't prepared to confront someone who doesn't need the crowd to feel real. They rely on surface-level interactions, scripted conversations, polite nods, borrowed beliefs. But you ask the questions they avoid. You force people to reflect when they'd rather distract. And that discomfort, it rattles them. Because when you stop playing the game, when you choose to be rather than perform, you remind everyone else that they are living someone else's life, wearing masks they've long forgotten how to remove. You become a mirror, not one that flatters, but one that reveals. And that, for most, is unbearable. Modern society is built on noise, distraction, and consensus. But your very presence breaks that rhythm. Your refusal to react on cue, to validate nonsense, to participate in collective illusions, that's what makes you dangerous. Not because you harm, but because you see. You see what's fake and what's hollow, and you don't pretend not to. That's why people mislabel your stillness as arrogance, your distance as coldness, your independence as threat. Because in a world of followers, the man who leads himself will always be feared. Modern relationships are built on comfort, not truth. But the intelligent man, he's allergic to illusions. He peels back masks. He questions why love feels transactional. He notices the performance in people's eyes, the dissonance between what is said and what is felt. And Kierkegaard warned us, the crowd is untruth. When a man refuses to be swallowed by the crowd, when he chooses his own path of meaning, solitude, and reflection, he breaks the entire framework society depends on to keep people passive and emotionally compliant. Women don't fear intelligent men because they're smart. They fear intelligent men because they cannot contain them. Because the intelligent man doesn't rely on flattery to be desired. He doesn't need validation to feel masculine. He doesn't play the puppet just to be chosen. He doesn't chase because he sees that most chases are rooted in illusion, not love. And when he does love, he loves with terrifying clarity, not for comfort but for revelation. That kind of presence, sharp, discerning, existentially honest, is rare. And what is rare is often rejected before it is respected. Most men are taught to chase acceptance, to trade pieces of themselves for affection. They become actors in their own lives, performing a role. The charming provider, the agreeable listener, the flawless partner. And it works until they meet a woman who wants something real. That's when the mask cracks. The intelligent man, however, doesn't perform. He lives from the inside out. His values are not dictated by social trends or emotional manipulation. He doesn't mold himself to be chosen. He molds his world to reflect truth. That's precisely what makes him uncontainable. He won't beg to be understood, and he won't bend to fit someone's script. His masculinity is rooted in being, not in being praised. And that makes people, especially those addicted to control, uneasy. Because in his presence, the old tactics stop working. Seduction feels hollow, flattery falls flat, emotional games collapse under the weight of his stillness. He sees through the mask. And worse, he sees through you. This is why the intelligent man is rejected before he is respected. He confronts the illusion at the core of so many modern connections, that comfort equals compatibility. He doesn't want comfort, he wants reality, and most aren't ready to face it. Kierkegaard wrote extensively about the concept of despair, but not as most people understand it. He called it the sickness unto death, a man being unaware that he is estranged from his true self. And that is what modern culture fears most in men, that they might wake up from the performance, that they might stop being charming and start being conscious. Because a conscious man cannot be seduced by applause or emotional chaos. A conscious man is no longer driven by the need to be liked. And when a man stops needing to be liked, he becomes free. And when a man becomes free, he becomes dangerous. Ask yourself, why do you feel misunderstood in every room you enter? Why do you sense people are uneasy around your silence? It's because most people, especially in this attention-driven world, derive their identity from being seen. But the intelligent man, he derives his identity from seeing, and seeing deeply makes others uncomfortable, especially when they're trying to hide. To live without awareness is to sleep through your own life, and most men are asleep, not because they are stupid, but because they were trained to be. Trained to seek approval, trained to win love by being agreeable, trained to fear their own depth because it made others uncomfortable. But when you become conscious, when you begin to see the layers beneath people's words, the motives behind their smiles, the desperation behind their affections, you become a mirror. And most people aren't ready to see what that mirror reflects. A conscious man threatens every room built on performance. He doesn't laugh just to smooth tension. He doesn't speak just to fill silence. He doesn't nod along when something feels false. He watches. And this watching, this quiet, unflinching attention, unnerves those who rely on chaos to feel powerful. Because once you no longer dance for attention, you expose those who do. Once you no longer seek validation, you reveal those addicted to it. Once you no longer fear rejection, you cannot be controlled. This is what Kierkegaard meant. Despair is not just suffering, it is ignorance of who you are. It is playing a role so well, for so long that you forget who you were before the script, and when you finally open your eyes, it's not applause you want. It's truth. Kierkegaard said, life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forwards. And intelligent men do live forward, but they are always watching, dissecting, understanding the structure of everything: power, emotion, seduction, fear. So what happens when a man is no longer seduced by the surface? When he stops being enchanted by the games, he becomes unplayable, not because he's cold, but because he's whole. And that wholeness threatens the entire economy of modern dating, where confusion is currency and emotional unpredictability is mistaken for passion. Kierkegaard knew this. He walked away from the only woman he ever loved, not because he didn't care, but because he did, because he knew that to live authentically meant to reject the role society assigns, even if it cost him everything. To be whole in a fractured world is to become a problem. When you stop responding to manipulation, they call you cold. When you don't chase after fleeting attention, they call you arrogant. When you stop performing, they say you've changed, but you haven't changed. You've awakened. And the awakened man can't go back to sleep. He sees how modern relationships are often based not on truth, but on mutual insecurity. He sees how a woman might test him not out of malice, but out of conditioning, to measure his emotional dependency. He sees how love, once sacred, has been turned into a battlefield of signals and performances. So what does he do? He steps back, not out of fear, but out of respect for himself and for what love should be. He is not here to be a puppet. He is not here to be validated like a product on display. He is here to meet, not to perform. He is here to see, not to chase shadows. This is why Kierkegaard's life matters. Because when he walked away from Regina Olsen, it wasn't indifference, it was reverence. He could not play a role, even in love. He could not sacrifice truth on the altar of social comfort. And neither can you. A man who has seen through the game cannot go back to clapping for it. Men, listen closely. The more intelligent you become, the more isolated you may feel. That is not failure, it is the price of awakening. You scare people not because you are unkind, but because you are unconditioned. And a man who cannot be conditioned cannot be controlled. And that is the greatest threat to any system built on manipulation. including romantic ones. Most people aren't looking for love, they're looking for usefulness. They want you to serve a role: provider, performer, protector, puppet. But the intelligent man steps outside of those frames. And when he does, he becomes invisible to those still trapped inside them. And that invisibility isn't loneliness, it's freedom. You no longer exist for the roles others imagined for you. You are no longer dancing for crumbs of affection. You're building your own table, and it only seats truth. But here's what no one tells you. Most of the world fears the man who can't be put to use, because he's not easily swayed. He won't jump at every compliment or collapse under every threat of withdrawal. He's not the man who buys flowers just to avoid conflict. He's not the man who performs masculinity like a circus act. He doesn't posture. He doesn't pretend. He observes, he withholds, and when he gives, it's real. That kind of man cannot be owned. And that's precisely what unsettles modern dynamics, because many relationships are built on the assumption that a man will trade his truth for temporary approval. But not you. You've stepped outside the script. You are not her therapist. You are not her ego repairman. You are a man, one who has remembered his essence and chosen to embody it rather than sell it. This is why, when you walk into a room and don't seek to entertain, when you sit quietly and simply see, people begin to fidget, not because you did something wrong, but because your presence says, I cannot be used, I cannot be played, I cannot be bought. And that, brother, is terrifying. Kierkegaard called this the leap of faith. To leave the security of roles, systems, and superficial expectations, and walk alone. To love truth more than comfort. To choose despair, if despair is honest, over bliss that is fake. And that leap will cost you. It will strip you, but it will also awaken you. Because once you see, once you truly see, you can never unsee. And your intelligence, if rooted in self-awareness and not just information, will turn you from a man who seeks validation into a man who seeks God, or meaning, or peace. And that is terrifying to others, and sometimes even to yourself, because to truly leap is to surrender your place in the herd, to walk away from applause, certainty, and scripted belonging, and walk into the unknown with only your conscience as your guide. That's not just rebellion, that's spiritual war, and most men don't want war. They want comfort dressed as connection. They want pleasure dressed as purpose. They want safety, even if that safety costs them their soul. But when you take the leap, when you stop repeating lines handed to you by culture, parents, or trends, you begin to hear your own voice again. And that voice is not always kind. It asks hard questions. Who are you really? Have you been living or just performing? Are you here to be accepted or to become? And when you finally dare to answer, you realize why most people run from the truth. Because once you touch it, you can never go back to comfort disguised as connection. The intelligent man who embraces this doesn't just change his relationships, he changes the geometry of his life. He doesn't orbit women, careers, or popularity. He orbits meaning. He moves with intention. He suffers with dignity, and he chooses solitude over simulation. Yes, the leap is terrifying, but it is the price of true alignment. And you'll find, the more you dare to leap, the more gravity itself begins to respect you. Because what comes next is not for the faint-hearted. Kierkegaard once said, "To dare is to lose one's footing momentarily. Not to dare is to lose oneself." And most men have already lost themselves, not because they lack intelligence, but because they've been trained to apologize for it. You were told to soften your words, to dim your insights, to pretend you don't see what's missing, smile when something's fake, laugh when something's shallow, stay silent when something's wrong. You were taught to be agreeable in order to be accepted, but acceptance that demands the death of your essence is not acceptance. It's assimilation, and the intelligent man who refuses to assimilate becomes a threat, not just to women, but to everyone who profits from his silence. You scare them, not because you are aggressive, but because you are precise. Because when you speak, your words carry weight. Because when you look at someone, they feel seen, not flattered, seen. and being seen is unbearable for those still wearing masks. You were never meant to be a whisper in a room of noise, but that's what the world demands. That you blend in, that you play along, that you trade your truth for approval and your presence for performance. From a young age, they told you to be nice. But what they really meant was be harmless. Be easy to digest. Don't ask too many questions. Don't be too intense. Don't reveal that you can see through the script everyone else is still reading from. And if you dared to speak your mind, if you said the thing that made others uncomfortable, you were met with silence or worse, with smiles that hid fear. Why? Because people don't fear the loud, they fear the clear. They fear the man who knows what he's saying, who doesn't ask for space but commands it without raising his voice. That kind of man, you, becomes a mirror, and most people spend their lives avoiding mirrors that reflect anything other than their own illusions. You're not difficult, you're not arrogant, you're just no longer manageable. And when a man stops being manageable, he becomes unforgettable or unbearable, depending on how deeply others are committed to their own delusion. The truth is, if your clarity unsettles people, that's not your problem, that's their awakening, beginning to sting. Most people don't want connection, they want comfort. They want reinforcement of their illusions, but the intelligent man dismantles illusion wherever he goes, even in love, especially in love. Because love for him is not a game. It's not a power play. It's not a role play of unmet childhood wounds. For the intelligent man, love is truth, and truth doesn't always feel good. It feels real. That's why you feel resistance. That's why you're met with confusion, even hostility, because your presence threatens the system that rewards performance. You don't beg, you don't chase, you don't explain yourself 10 times just to be understood. You walk away, not because you're angry, but because your soul refuses to be auctioned off to the highest bidder of convenience. And that kind of man, calm, grounded, inwardly sovereign, is more terrifying than any tyrant, because he is not reacting, he is choosing. And choosing consciously is the greatest rebellion left in this world. In a world addicted to emotional chaos, your stability feels like a foreign language. People mistake your silence for coldness. They confuse your restraint for disinterest, but that's only because they've been conditioned to interpret drama as depth. The truth is, most people mistake stimulation for love. They want the chase, the mystery, the high. Not the man who holds space with quiet presence, not the one who meets them with unwavering clarity instead of dopamine games. You do not love with hooks, you love with honesty. That alone makes you dangerous, because in relationships, your very existence forces others to confront their own intentions. Are they here for connection or just for control? You don't give them the highs and lows that make them feel alive through chaos. You offer them something far more threatening, consistency. And consistency terrifies people who are still ruled by their inner wounds. They don't know what to do with a man who doesn't bite the bait, who doesn't play tug-of-war with their insecurities, who simply says, "This is who I am. You may join me, but I will not contort myself to be kept." This is why your stillness is misread, because it reflects a different kind of love, one built not on neediness or submission, but on mutual sovereignty, and most aren't ready for that. But you offer it anyway, because you're not here to be easy. You're here to be true. You want to know why intelligent men scare modern women? It's not because women are shallow. It's not because they're malicious. It's because we live in a world where most people have been conditioned to expect performance, not presence. And the intelligent man cannot fake presence. He brings himself fully, or not at all. And most are not ready for that kind of fullness. It's too raw, too unfiltered, too demanding of self-awareness. And most people, men and women alike, would rather stay comfortably asleep than wake up to their own contradictions. Kierkegaard's life was a testament to this paradox. He loved Regina Olsen, but he left her, not because he didn't feel, but because he felt too much. He knew his path was solitary, that his inner world was too vast, too turbulent, to anchor it to someone who had not also confronted their own chaos. That's the paradox of the intelligent man. He longs for intimacy, but not at the cost of his integrity. He desires connection, but refuses to perform for it. He is willing to walk alone, rather than dilute his essence just to be desired. That's not arrogance, that's alignment. And it terrifies people. Because deep down, everyone wants to be chosen, but the intelligent man, he wants to be met. This distinction between being chosen and being met is everything. Because to be chosen requires performance, but to be met demands authenticity. Most people only know how to choose what is familiar, safe, or socially validated, but to meet someone where they truly are, that requires depth. It requires a soul that has sat with pain, a heart that no longer needs masks to feel worthy, and that's what separates you. You don't want applause. You don't crave worship. You want reciprocity, a soul that sees your edges and doesn't flinch. But most have never seen a man who doesn't reach for the script, a man who won't say what she wants to hear, a man who listens instead of performs, a man who holds space for silence instead of rushing to fill it with flattery. To such a woman, your presence is unreadable. It doesn't trigger the usual emotional loops. It isn't reactive. It doesn't plead. And because it can't be manipulated, it becomes deeply threatening. You don't make her feel powerful by pretending to be smaller. You challenge her to meet you where you are. Not by raising your voice, but by refusing to bend your spine just to keep her close. This is the kind of love most don't know how to receive, because it requires them to drop their persona too. That's why you're feared. Not because you intimidate, but because you awaken. And being met requires the other to also be whole, to have gone through their own fires, to have unlearned their own lies. And most aren't ready for that. So they call you distant, difficult, cold. But the truth is, you're not cold, you're clear. You don't hate women, you just don't worship illusions. You don't hate love, you just refuse to call dependency love. You've seen too much to play blind, and that's what scares them. You're not manipulable, you're not predictable, you're not waiting to be told who to be. Kierkegaard said, "The most common form of despair is not being who you are, but you." If you're listening this far, you are different. You want to know who you are, beyond the noise, beyond the roles, beyond the craving for approval. And that journey will cost you popularity, it will cost you comfort, it may even cost you love. But what you gain in return is far more powerful: selfhood, sovereignty, sanity. You'll stop searching for someone to complete you, because you will no longer feel incomplete. And that, brother, is when you become truly dangerous. Not to others, but to the system that thrives on broken men. You become dangerous the moment you stop needing to be understood, when you stop bargaining with the world for crumbs of acceptance, when your silence becomes louder than any performance. That's when the system flinches, because it relies on your doubt, on your distraction, on your endless pursuit of approval from people who are terrified of their own reflection. But when you step away from all that, you become a mirror no one can escape. You reflect the weight of unrealized potential. You expose the cost of fake connection. You reveal how many people have built their lives around lies they no longer believe in. And that is why they label you. They call you intimidating, difficult, detached, because it's easier to shame your clarity than to confront their confusion. But your clarity is not cruelty, it's a gift. It's the flame that reminds others what truth feels like in a world that trades it for applause. And the more you stay rooted in that truth, the more you attract the very few who are ready to meet you there. Not many will, but the ones who do, they'll see you, not as too much, not as too intense, but as real. And that's the only thing worth being. If you found this video valuable, don't let it end here. Like and share it with someone who's still in the fog. Subscribe for more wisdom they don't teach you in school, and if you want to support the mission, then click the link in the description and support the channel. Your voice matters.